She was doomed by the snake bite, but I sucked out the venom and changed everything asterisk. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the unblinking gaze of Proxima Vidia's twin suns, their brutal heat turning the sand into molten glass and the air into a shimmering curtain of distortion. Major Nick Harrington trudged through it all, sweat dripping from his brow, soaking into the collar of his uniform. His boots sank into the dunes with every step, his muscles aching from 3 days of reconnaissance under conditions that would have broken lesser men. But Nick wasn't here to complain. He was here to make history. The holographic map flickered at his wrist, guiding him to a set of coordinates that, according to Earth Command, marked the meeting point for first contact with the Vidian delegation. So far, all he'd seen was an endless sea of sand and the ominous shadow of the massive Vidian mothership hanging above the horizon like a silent artificial moon. A reminder that this world was not Earth, and humans were not in charge. Grumbling fell silent when, cresting a dune, something remarkable came into view out an oasis, but not like any he'd ever imagined. Strange, spiraling plants twisted around pools of iridescent water that shimmered with internal light. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of bioluminescent flora, and at the edge of that glowing pool stood them, the Vidians. They looked vaguely human, but only in form. Their skin shimmered in hues of violet and indigo, marked with intricate bioluminescent patterns that shifted subtly as they moved. The soldiers stood tall, armored in sleek plating that pulsed with energy, their expressions unreadable, weapons slung across their backs. But Nick saw none of that at first. His gaze locked onto her dot. She stood apart from the warriors, her posture fluid and regal, skin like lavender silk, eyes the color of ancient gold. Snow-white hair fell in waves down her back, the strands catching the sun like woven silver. Her bodysuit clung to her form like shadow made tangible, elegant yet unapologetically functional. Nick raised his hands in peace. Major Nicholas Harrington, United Earth Forces. I'm here on behalf of the Colonial Alliance. She stepped forward, her voice a melodic resonance. I am Salara, diplomatic liaison of the Vidian High Council. We welcome. A scream cut through the air like a blade. Salara dropped to one knee, her face twisted in agony. A serpentine creature writhed on the sand behind her metallic scales, suction-fanged jaws. It slithered back into the underbrush, leaving behind the ugly red welt blooming on her thigh. Dark veins spread outward from the wound at alarming speed, sickly gray threading through the lavender of her skin. Venom striker! A Vidian warrior shouted, but none moved to help. Is already dead, another said solemnly. Nick's brain kicked into overdrive. Training. Survival protocol. There was no time for debate. He dropped beside her, tearing open the fabric around the wound. The venom pulsed, glowing green. He pressed his lips to her skin and sucked hard, ignoring the bitter, burning taste. Spat. Sucked again. 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 Until he tasted blood instead of fire. The Vidians watched in silence, weapons lowered, faces unreadable. Finally, Nick sat back, breath ragged, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Salara stared up at him, eyes wide, lips trembling. Why? Why would you do that? Nick shrugged. Where I come from, we don't leave people behind, human or not. The spreading gray halted. The red welt began to fade. She lived, and none of them would ever see humanity the same way again. Asterisk, the silence that followed felt deeper than the desert itself. Wind stirred across the oasis, rustling the luminous fronds and rippling the waters. Surface, but no one spoke. The Vidian warriors stood frozen in place, their weapons slack in their hands, as if their entire worldview had been upended by the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Salara's breathing slowed. The pain etched across. Her face began to ease. The angry gray modeling at her thigh had stopped spreading. Her skin, though pale, no longer looked necrotic. Her golden eyes remained fixed on Nick, blinking slowly as if trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Nick wiped the last trace of venom from his mouth and stood slowly, his legs slightly unsteady from the physical effort and the acrid taste that still clung to the back of his throat. He met the eyes of the tallest Vidian warrior, broad-shouldered, cobalt-skinned, with a face carved from stone and a weapon that hummed faintly at his hip. The warrior's gaze was unreadable. Then, at last, he spoke. "You have done what none of us would dare. You have faced death for one of ours." His voice was low, resonant, like gravel under pressure. "You are ... unlike the humans we imagined." Nick offered a tired half-smile. "You've met others?" "Not in person," said another warrior, stepping forward cautiously. "Only through transmissions. We thought you reckless, dangerous, loud." "We are all those things," Nick admitted. "But we're also something else. We help each other. We fight for those who can't." Solara tried to sit up, but winced. Nick instinctively crouched and offered his hand. She hesitated only for a breath and then took it. Her hand was warm, delicate, and her grip surprisingly strong. He helped her to her feet, and her body leaned slightly into his for balance. The gesture was instinctive, trusting, and completely uncharacteristic for a Vidian. Nick could see it in the warrior's shifting stances and glances. "I do not understand," Solara said quietly, her voice close to his ear. "What you did. It defies our doctrine. To touch one another like that, to share breath, to draw poison from the flesh, it is ... forbidden." "Then maybe your doctrine needs a rewrite," Nick said gently. The warrior commander stepped forward. "I am Thorn, senior guardian of this delegation. You will accompany us to the outpost. Our medics must ensure the poison is fully purged from Solara's blood." "She be fine," Nick said with quiet certainty, his arm still around her waist. "I got most of it." Thorn stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a gesture Nick recognized from military life, the commander extended his forearm. A clasp of mutual respect. Nick took it. As they began the trek back across the dunes toward the Vidian outpost, Nick felt the shift. The warriors no longer kept their distance from him. Solara walked beside him, one arm around his back, her body warm and trembling faintly. Occasionally, her gaze drifted to him, brows furrowed in contemplation. He could feel her studying him, not like a scientist, examining a specimen, but like a woman trying to understand a force she'd never encountered before. Not fear, not mistrust. Wonder. They arrived at the outskirts of the outpost as the twin suns began to dip toward the horizon, casting the world in gold and deep indigo. The towers of the Vidian compound rose like glass spires from the sand, their translucent surfaces glowing softly as if absorbing the light of the sky. The main gate dilated open without a sound, and the cool air inside hit Nick like a balm. A healer pale-skinned with silver markings rushed forward and took Solara from his side, guiding her toward a biobed while scanning her leg. "Strike her venom," the medic muttered. "She should be dead." "She isn't," Thorn said, voice grave. "Because of the human." The healer turned to Nick, brow furrowed. "You ... put your mouth on the wound?" Nick shrugged. "Didn't exactly have a med kit handy?" "A primitive method," the healer murmured, "but somehow effective. Fascinating." Solara lay still on the biobed, watching Nick with wide, luminous eyes. "Why?" she whispered again. "You didn't know me. You owed me nothing." Nick looked at her, really looked at her. The sweat on her brow, the rise and fall of her chest, the fading glow of her wound. He saw the curiosity, the vulnerability, and the flicker of something else, something fragile, something new. I didn't do it because I owed you anything, he said softly. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Solara blinked slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. You're not what I expected from your kind. Nick offered her a lopsided grin. I get that a lot. She gave a small, almost inaudible laugh. Then her eyes fluttered closed. The healer injected a shimmering serum into her arm. She'll recover, he said, but she needs rest. You? Too, but Nick couldn't rest. Not yet, not with the uneasy feeling that saving Solara's life had just placed him at the center of something far bigger than a simple diplomatic mission. He looked out the window at the horizon. A tremor rattled faintly beneath his boots. The desert was waking, and something beneath it stirred. Asterisk. The night on Proxima Vidia was unlike any Nick had ever experienced. Above the oasis settlement, the twin moons hung heavy and luminous in the Av sky, their pale glow casting long, shifting shadows across the alien towers. The translucent walkways that connected the upper levels pulsed faintly with bioluminescence, lighting the city from within like a living organism. Wind whispered through crystalline vents, carrying with it the distant scent of cooling sand. Exotic flowers, and something else, something electric. I have, came Solara's voice. Smooth as water, threaded with a note of quiet strength. Enough. Nick turned to face her. She stood in the moonlight, wrapped in a new robe of midnight blue that shimmered like liquid. The folds of it clung to her body, highlighting her alien curves, but it was her skin that caught his breath. The bioluminescent patterns along her arms and throat pulsed gently like living script etched in starlight. Glad to see you on your feet. Nick sighed, trying to sound casual. Wasn't sure if my cowboy medicine was going to do the trick. She stepped closer. It did more than save my life. Her eyes met his golden, ancient, yet searching. Curious. He waited. When the venom entered me, I felt alone, cut off, like my body was shutting down piece by piece. But then something else happened. Her voice dropped. I felt you. Not just your presence. Your emotions. Rage, determination, panic, and then ... calm. Nick frowned. You're saying you felt what I was feeling? She nodded. It began when you drew the poison from my blood. The striker's venom is not just a toxin, it binds, connects. Those who survive a bite are sometimes psychically linked to the one who saved them. Among my people, it's an old myth, ancient, unverified, but you're saying it's real? Her silence was answer enough. Nick exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. Great, so now I'm telepathically married to a space diplomat. She smiled faintly. No, it's not that simple. A bond doesn't create emotion. It only ... reveals it. He looked at her. Really looked. At the curve of her lips, the shimmering of her skin, at the way her head tilted slightly when she studied him like she was trying to memorize a moment. Then what does it say about me? He asked quietly. That I risked my life for someone I didn't know? She took one more step closer. They stood inches apart now. That you're exactly what we need, she whispered. Nick's heart thudded. For a long silent moment, neither of them moved. Then her hand rose, fingers brushing the stubble on his jaw, a feather-light touch that made his skin hum. Her gaze flicked to his lips. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she kissed him. It was not the desperate heat of survival. It was something else, slow, intentional, a bridge spanning two worlds, two species, two people who had no right to feel this much, this soon. Her lips were soft, warm, tasting faintly of something floral and sharp, alien, unmistakably her. When they finally parted, her bioluminescent markings pulsed brightly along her arms and neck. She stepped back, breathing just a bit faster. That happens when we feel strong emotion, she said, answering the question in his eyes. Nick smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before she could respond, an alarm blared through. The outpost. Crimson light bathed the walkway. The tranquil night shattered. A Vidian voice came over the comm. "Perimeter breach. Hostiles approaching Sector 7. Solara's expression darkened instantly. "Sand raiders," she said. "They must have tracked your arrival." Nick's instincts kicked in. He tapped his holster, making sure his sidearm was secure. "I guess the welcome party's over." She reached out, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Be careful." He gave her a lopsided grin. "Where I'm from, we have a saying, once lucky, twice good." She blinked. "What does that mean?" Nick turned toward the lift as it hissed open. "Means saving you wasn't luck, and neither will be what comes next." Then he was gone, disappearing into the red-lit depths of the outpost, heading toward the threat, toward the unknown, and Solara stood in the glow of the moons, fingers brushing her lips, feeling a connection that was no longer just psychic. Something deeper had taken root, something irreversible, and the desert was far from finished with them. Asterisk. Lift dropped fast, shadows racing up the translucent walls as crimson emergency lights pulsed in rhythmic warning. Nick crouched slightly to absorb the momentum, his hand steady on the grip of his sidearm. The tension in the air had thickened no longer the uneasy piece of diplomacy, but the charged silence before combat. The doors hissed open into a corridor, bathed in flickering red. Smoke curled from a damaged conduit near the ceiling. Vidian warriors hustled past in formation, their armor illuminated by the eerie glow of the alert system. Commander Thorne stood at the junction ahead, issuing orders. In clipped Vidian to his subordinates. His eyes snapped to Nick as he approached. "You're armed," Thorne observed. "Always," Nick replied. "What's the situation?" "Multiple life forms approaching the outer wall. Not raiders we thought they were, but they're too fast, too coordinated." Nick frowned. "You mean military trained? Or something worse?" Thorne muttered. Krell, Thorne's second in command, joined them. He nodded toward Nick, the earlier skepticism in his expression now replaced with something more grounded respect, maybe. "You're with me," Krell said. "We hold the eastern flank." Nick followed without hesitation, heart pounding but mind clear. Combat was his domain. No speeches, no politics, just action, instinct, and survival. The eastern barricade had already taken damage. Chunks of the polished wall lay scattered across the sand like shattered glass. The warriors had set up a makeshift defense line using energy barriers and repurposed equipment. Nick knelt behind one, peeking over the edge. What he saw turned his. Blood to ice. Riders. But not like the primitive raiders described in briefings. These ones wore segmented armor that shimmered like molten ore, camouflaged against the desert terrain. They rode six-legged beasts, tall, sinewy things with jaws like exposed machinery and eyes that reflected no light. And their weapons weren't salvaged or mismatched. They were clean, sleek, manufactured. Military-grade. Nick fired first. His pulse rifle hummed and kicked against his shoulder as the first bolt lanced across the dunes, striking a rider square in the chest. The alien tumbled from its mount in a cloud of dust. Two more shots. Two more bodies fell. Krell glanced sideways at him, mandibles twitching in surprise. "Your aim is unnatural." "Human Special Forces," Nick said, already tracking his next target. "We train for this." The battle exploded around them in a frenzy of light and sound. Vidian plasma bolts hissed through the dark, colliding with energy shields and armor plating. The riders returned fire with coordinated salvos, and Nick realized this wasn't a raid, it was an assault. They wanted the outpost, or more specifically, they wanted him. A bolt of energy seared over his head, singing the edge of the barricade. He ducked, reloaded, and growled. "We need to break their formation." "We can't," Krell shouted. "They have the terrain." Nick scanned the field, eyes narrowing as his brain switched to tactical. Dunes, elevation, mounts, heat signatures, weak points. Then he saw a flanking route behind a ridge. Exposed, but close enough for a maneuver. "Cover me," he barked. "I'm going around." "You'll die," Krell snapped. "Then die with me," Nick fired back with a grin and out. Vaulted the barricade. Sand exploded beneath his boots as he sprinted across the open field, fire lancing past him. Behind him, Krell cursed and followed Nick Dove behind a half-buried mineral deposit, heart pounding, rifle up. He pulled a small cylindrical device from his belt, a sonic disruptor. It whined softly in his hand, a gift from Earth's more paranoid labs. He looked at Krell. "Cover your ears." Krell barely had time to react before Nick activated the device and rolled it down the dune. The shockwave hit like a tidal wave silent to humans, but devastating to the mounts. The beasts screamed and scattered, bucking riders off in every direction. Nick moved. Like lightning, he rose and opened fire, dropping disoriented raiders with surgical precision. Krell joined him, his plasma rifle humming in sync. Within minutes, the flank collapsed. The remaining raiders fell back, retreating in a chaotic tangle of panicked beasts and shouted commands. Nick chased them to the ridge before stopping, breathing hard. He looked down and saw one raider struggling to rise. A smaller alien, mottled green skin and forearms. Nick tackled him, pinning the creature to the ground. "Let me go," it hissed, voice surprisingly clear. "You have no right. You attacked us," Nick growled. "That gives me every right." Back at the outpost, the moon was tense, but victorious. The walls held. The raiders had retreated for now. But there were wounds. Warriors had fallen. The outer barricade was breached, and something darker hung in the air. Solara rushed to Nick as he re-entered the control level. Her golden eyes scanned his bloodied uniform, focusing on the shallow gash across his arm. "You're hurt," she breathed. He hadn't even noticed. "It's nothing." But he didn't pull away when her fingers touched the wound. Her skin was cool, soothing. "You fight like no one I've ever seen?" she murmured, applying a glowing salve from a nearby medical kit. "You move like fire." Nick looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "And you care like no one I've ever met." Her hand paused. Her gaze rose. "I felt you again," she said softly. "In the field. Your fear. Your will to survive." He reached for her wrist gently. "And I felt you. I think the bond's getting stronger." Before either of them could speak again, Thorn entered the room, his face grim. Behind him, the raider Nick captured was bound and flanked by guards. "He's talking," Thorn said. "And you both need to hear." The prisoner's eyes glinted with something between fear and fury as he sat bound in the security chamber, his forearms locked behind the sleek Vidian restraint module. Sweat slicked the mottled green skin of his brow, and his breath came shallow under the harsh interrogation lights. Around him, the tension in the room felt almost physical. Commander Thorn stood rigid, arms crossed over his armored chest, while Solara stood beside Nick, her posture deceptively calm. Nick leaned against the wall, arms folded. His blood was still pumping from the battle, but his voice was calm. "Cold. Start talking." The raider hissed between clenched teeth. "If I do, they'll kill me." "If you don't," Nick said flatly, "I will." Solara's eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't protest. Not this time. Not after what they'd seen. The raider's mandibles twitched. He looked at Solara, then Thorn, then finally back to Nick. "Fine. You want the truth?" "You're not." Going to like it. Nick gave a humorless smile. Try me. The weapons, the raider spat. The armor, the training. It all came from inside your outpost. Thorn stepped forward. Explain. It was Counselor Vex. He's been supplying our cells for months. Weapons, coordinates, support. He wants the human alliance to fail. Solara's expression didn't change, but the glow along her neck dimmed, flickered. That's impossible. Vex is one of the Council's most respected. Was, Nick cut in. He's been feeding you lies. The prisoner tilted his head. You think that's the worst of it? He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. Your colony construction. It's disturbing something beneath the sands. Something ancient, something hungry. Nick's chest tightened. The Buers. They're real, the raider confirmed, and they're waking. Vex knew this. He wanted it. Thought if enough humans died, you'd leave this world. Solara's composure cracked. The Buers are myth, the raider sneered. Then why? Have your scout teams vanished? Why are there tremors where none ever were? Nick's mind raced. It made sense. The tremors. The fear. The unnatural silence between strikes. He was trying to awaken them and control them. Impossible, Thorn said grimly. They cannot be controlled. He believes otherwise, the raider snapped. He found something buried in the canyons. Ancient tech. Thought it would let him command them. Use them as weapons. Nick stepped forward, fists clenched. Then we need proof, and fast. Within an hour, the three of them were in Thorn's quarters, a secure war room lit by soft bioluminescent panels. Solara stood at the central console, calling up schematics of the council chambers. Vex's private terminal is in his quarters, she said. Guarded, shielded, but I have access. Thorn nodded. I can trigger a security drill. Divert the guards. And I'll go with her, Nick said. Clara looked up. No, you'll attract too much attention. You stay with Thorn. If something goes wrong? If something goes wrong, Nick interrupted, stepping closer. I'm not letting you. Go in alone. They stood close now, their bond thrumming like a heartbeat between them. Solara's skin patterns pulsed with anxious light. This isn't just about orders anymore. No, Nick said, brushing a strand of white hair from her cheek. It's about trust. Her hand found his, fingers lacing together. Then, trust me, let me do this. He hesitated, but only for a moment, then nodded. Later that night, the plan went into motion. Thorn's security drill created the perfect cover. While the elite guards were pulled from the upper council spire, Solara made her way through the silent, soaring halls to Vex's quarters. Her diplomatic access bypassed the entry lock, and the doors opened with a sigh. Inside, the chamber was more a trophy hall than living quarters. Alien artifacts lined the walls. Bones, weapons, and other grim relics of conquest. In the far corner, a holographic terminal shimmered softly. She approached it with shaking fingers, inserting a bypass crystal from her robe. Lines of alien text scrolled across the display. Communications, transfers, video logs. Solara's breath caught. There it was, evidence of everything. Vex's communications with the raiders, blueprints of the Bureau's resting grounds, a map overlay with recent tremors, and at the center a device, ancient, black, spider-like in shape. The interface marked it only as resonator. She pulled a small drive from her robes and began copying the data. Back at the outpost, Nick paced like a caged animal, hand resting on his sidearm. Through the bond, he could feel her, nervous, focused, determined. Then spike. Fear. The floor trembled beneath his boots. A deep, guttural quake that rattled the walls. The console lit up with flashing red symbols. Thorn's voice was grim. They've breached the central levels. Nick felt Solara's presence return through the bond closer now running. She burst into the room, face flushed, drive in hand. "We have it," she panted. "Everything. Vex's plans, his treason, and proof the Buers are real." The tremor hit again, stronger. Cracks formed along the ceiling. Nick caught her as she stumbled, pulling her close. "You okay?" She nodded against his chest. "But we're out of time." They turned toward the elevator, but the lights flickered below them, in the dark. Tunnels of the outpost. Something massive was moving. Nick looked at her, at Thorn, at the data drive, then up at the trembling ceiling. "Time to end this," he said, and as another tremor split the floor beneath them, Nick Harrington, soldier, diplomat, Venom-bonded stranger prepared to face the monsters below. Together. Asterisk. Floor shuddered again, deeper this time, as if the planet itself was groaning. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. A faint tremor rolled beneath their boots. The entire spire seemed to breathe inhale, exhale with something dark and ancient rising from below. Nick's instincts screamed. Every cell in his body knew what this was. Not a mere seismic event. This was a predator's warning. The Buers were no longer waking. They were here. The gravity lift groaned under the strain as it carried Nick, Solara, and Thorn to the upper levels of the council spire. Solara clutched the data drive close to her chest. Her golden eyes never left the floor display. Nick stood beside her, jaw tight, sidearm primed and holstered. Through the bond, she could feel his urgency, his anger, but also his fear. Not for himself, for her. As the lift doors slid open with a soft chime, they were met by an explosion of noise, panic, voices, orders shouted in Vidian. The High Council chamber was in chaos. Counselors argued. Guards rushed to and from command terminals, and holographic projections of the Buers flickered in the center of the room. Massive creatures, armored like tanks, drilling through the bedrock with sickening ease. The eldest counselor, a female Vidian with silver skin and eyes like obsidian, turned sharply. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Solara strode forward, data drive raised. "Counselors, we bring proof. Vex is the architect of this disaster. He conspired with off-world raiders, sabotaged our alliance, and knowingly awakened the Buers." Gasps filled the chamber. Nick stepped beside her, planting his feet. "You want unity? Start by listening to the one person who nearly died for it." With trembling fingers, Solara inserted the drive into the central console. The chamber dimmed as the holographic display expanded, projecting intercepted messages, supply manifests, schematics of ancient control devices, and buried deep beneath it all, seismic data matched against colonial machinery. Vex's voice echoed. From one file, "If enough colonists perish, the alliance will collapse. The Buers will do what our diplomacy cannot." Murmurs turned to outrage. "You've doomed us all," a younger counselor said, turning on Vex, who stood silent, cornered, face pale. Vex suddenly lunged, seizing a ceremonial blade from a nearby display and taking the eldest counselor hostage. "No one leaves this chamber. You fools. You think humans will bring peace? They bring ruin. Look at them." Nick didn't hesitate. One step. One shot. The pulse bolt caught Vex in the shoulder. The blade clattered to the ground, and guards swarmed him, dragging him down. The elder counselor fell to her knees, stunned, but alive. "Nice shot," Solara whispered. Nick holstered his weapon. Didn't even break a sweat. But the moment of calm was shattered by a deafening roar from the foundations of the spire. Lights flickered. A siren wailed. The ground beneath them shifted. Then came a new tremor, sharper, closer. "They've breached the support tunnels," Thorn marked, scanning emergency feeds. "They're coming up. Nothing we have can stop them." Nick's hand gripped the railing as another wave of nausea passed through him. Not from motion, from sensation. The tingling he'd first felt after saving Solara had returned, intensified, like electricity in his blood. He staggered, clutching his chest. Solara caught him. "Nick, it's the Venom," he gasped. "I can feel them. The Bures, like they feel me." Thorne's head snapped around. "You're reacting to them?" Solara's eyes widened. "Nick, the ancient texts. They said Striker Venom was the only thing the Bures feared, that it repelled them. Nick." Straightened, breath ragged. "I still have it in my system. That's why I'm alive. That's why I'm connected to them." Solara's face blanched. "You're saying you can control them?" "No," Nick said grimly. "But maybe I can scare them off. Long enough to give us a fighting chance." The room went still. "You'll be killed," Thorne warned. "And let me die doing something that matters," Nick said. He turned to Solara. "Unless you have a better plan." "There may be another way," she whispered. "Our scientists were extracting venom to study antidotes. If we combine your blood with concentrated venom, we might be able to create an aerosol. Repel them across the entire spire." "Time?" Nick asked. "Not enough," she admitted. Nick turned to the council. "Then make time." What followed was a frenzy of motion. The medbay became a war lab. Nick sat shirtless in a biosphere as tubes drew his blood. Solara worked beside Maris, the head physician, adjusting the venom distillation ratio. Human colonists, warned of the threat, arrived in droves to donate blood without hesitation. Within an hour, they had their compound. Solara and Nick stood in the environmental control room, hands on the master valve. "Ready?" she asked. "Not even a little," he said. "Let's do it." They pressed the switch together.